Hello, everybody. My name is Ruben Aguilar. Today on the show, we are discussing Hemingway Week, one of the final episodes. And the book is titled A Farewell to Arms.
Nice.
Welcome, Jacob.
Hey, Rube.
A Farewell to Arms was published in 1929. Many people say this was it. This is the book. And, we're going to discuss a documentary, or we have looked at a documentary about Hemingway in it. And they mentioned in this documentary that this great writer, Hemingway, has influenced more writers than anybody else in the 20th century. That might be so, but I can't think of any writer like him that writes like him. So we can discuss, I think we need to discuss two things. We need to talk about the title and we need to talk about the ending, right? But before we do, let me show you something about the book. I don't know if you could see this. This is page 17, and it's dialogue. That's what this book is. Now, I've never read this before. I never read A Farewell to Arms until this week, and I didn't know there was this much dialogue, and that is an interesting approach. It's what makes this book different. And for those who say, well, Hemingway has influenced so many writers, who does that? I can't think of very many writers who spend pages and pages of dialogue. And the effect, as I was reading it, is that I made my own conclusions about these characters. They are on the page. They are not described. Hemingway does not describe them. And you walk away with an idea of them and not what the writer paints. And that is Hemingway. And by the way, I can only think of one writer that he reminds me of, and maybe I'll bring that. We'll talk about him later briefly. But I just had this impression that there's nobody like this, and it's effective. I always thought this was a story about the war.
Right.
This is a love story. What are your thoughts of A Farewell to Arms?
Well, Ruben, it's my first book I ever read of Hemingway was the Farewell to Arms, and I want to say my senior year in high school, maybe my freshman year in college in that time period. And I remember thinking, wow, this was so much fun to read. Now, I think I liked it, Ruben, because what you're alluding to is just the dialogue and these short, pithy sentences, right? I could get it. I could understand it. Where some other authors, I think, I'm not sure, I don't want to say they're pretentious. It's just different writing, just a different type of style. But at least his style at my age, when I first started reading it, I got it and I understood it and I enjoyed it. And it was I'm kind of a romantic, I don't know what that means totally, except I love love stories, and this is a love story. And if you love love stories, this is one to read. Not missing the historical point, because again, I'm also drawn to the historical piece where this is set in World War I. It's also semi-autobiographical, right? Where this is about Hemingway when he joined up and served in the Italian army, and how he got injured and he fell in love with the nurse and so forth. But I think the characters are strong. You're alluding to Catherine Barclay and Henry, right? Trying to remember his first name, for Frederick Henry, right? Which is the main protagonist in the story, and their love story, which seems so. And I'm not sure if I'm going ahead of myself, because I know you want to talk about the ending and then also the title, Farewell to Arms. But I think this love, and we mentioned a little bit in the film, that we reviewed that this is a love story, and the title can be both relationship and with the war. I'm not sure if that's what you were sharing in the beginning of this episode.
I haven't read much analysis of this book, so I'm just giving you my impression, having just read it. In that, A Farewell to Arms, when you read that title, you think, oh, this is a story about how do we get rid of war? How does war end? Yeah. But then you read it and you think, well, this is a love story. And so by midway through the book, I'm thinking, oh, that's how you do it, through love, through romance. Wars will continue, and they are in the middle of a war. As you mentioned, he's a medic, and she's an English, is it nurse?
The nurse.
And, so, but what? So if you read it, I don't know if they had an argument once. It's an unusual love story. Yeah. It almost is, now getting ahead or perhaps getting ahead of ourselves, in the sense that the documentary that we're going to discuss has a moment where he talks about the Garden of Eden. Hemingway talks about the Garden of Eden book that he wrote but didn't complete. This, to me, is the Garden of Eden, this love story, because they don't argue. It's almost Hemingway creating a model love story, an idyllic version of love that probably doesn't exist. Yeah. With one little maybe exception, there is a little thing going on in the book that I don't know if you noticed. He drinks a lot in this book. Oh yeah. His character drinks and drinks and drinks. Yeah. But it's it's also an idyllic picture of alcoholism. Yeah. Where everything is just set in, they drank warm wine with some fruits in it. He ordered a whiskey and soda. The types of foods they're eating, yeah. There's constant talk of alcohol and drinking in this. And then, but even that is idyllic. And so to me, it's a love story that doesn't exist. Yeah. In a way. Well, I think it does make sense. But can I just add something? The character Helen Ferguson, another nurse who's friends with Catherine Barkley, she sees this relationship and she wants to come and kind of wake them up. Like, this is not real life. She's like, you guys are going to hurt each other. Something's going to happen. You're going to hurt her. Talking to Frederick, this is not going to end well. And they're just basically saying, we're going to be okay. We love each other. It's all going to be fine. And she's trying to like let them know, no, it's not going to be okay. And then finally she kind of goes, okay, well, you guys do love each other. But it's like nothing could get in the way of their love. Not this lady, not anyone. And you're right, Ruben. I don't think I can think of one time where they disagreed, where there was none of that. Except to say things like, do I love you more than you love me? Right. It's like, it's that kind of thing. Yeah. But it doesn't feel sappy. It's just two people that care about each other to the very end. There are, by the way, there is an Italian character in this, both in the movie and in the book, that is, I mean, he likes Catherine in the beginning. Yeah. Yeah. and they show it in the movie too. And then of course, he gets supplanted by Frederick. But so there's that. But it's a good character. I think it's Lieutenant Rinaldi, right? And he calls him baby all the time. And I always think of when our other brother, our brother Chris, when he was younger, there was a man. I'm not sure if you remember this. His name is Mr. Escobar. He used to call our brother Chris baby all the time, and I couldn't get it. But it's a term of endearment. It's just like I really care about you, and you're a special guy. And this Rinaldi, this Lieutenant Rinaldi, loved Frederick Henry and called him baby all the time. It was just kind of an interesting little nickname. So, well, obviously it's a term of endearment. It is. Kind of nasty. Right. Rinaldi has a really interesting line
Mhm.
about the Apostle Paul that I had to write down and look
Mhm.
at because it was unusual, and I could see some Christians not liking what he's saying.
Hmm.
So I'm going to just read it and then get your reaction
Sure.
to this, to to what Rinaldi says. He's obviously some kind of a philosopher at times,
Mhm.
and he says Saint Paul, he was a rounder, and it gets worse. He was a rounder and a chaser, and when he was no longer hot, he said it was no good. When he was finished, he made the rules for us who are still hot. Isn't that so, Federico?
Wow.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember those lines. And I think that this book had so many cool lines. I don't remember that one for some reason. But
Now,
that's so poetic.
what's your impression of that though? When he's saying this about St. Paul, it's not really a compliment.
No, no, no. And I think he's just saying his interpretation, and it's not
Obviously,
biblical. It's not
Matt,
biblical.
I'm asking you what.
Yeah.
So you don't like this?
No. Well, I understand it. I'm not saying I dislike it or like it. I understand the situation. These are not biblical or God fearing people. I wouldn't say.
I'm
Um,
not. I don't know if I disagree with what he's saying.
okay.
Well, he's a rounder.
Sure.
He's saying he's on the prowl. He's on the hunt, and then when he's no longer hot, then he's asking us to do it. I mean, I'm not even so sure if St. Paul says something that different. He was a persecutor of the church,
Sure.
and then suddenly he's not. I don't know. It was an interesting take, and it made me think.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I'm not saying I disagree or agree with that. I'm just saying it's just a different take. And but I think that's where Hemingway's at that time. He's a young man. He's what 29, 30 years old when he wrote this book, and he's just becoming a man. So I think he has a lot to say, and that's one example of when you deal with where he's at spiritually. Yeah.
Well, okay, I wasn't going to go deep into the psychology of Hemingway. I was just looking at this character and his
Right.
because one of the reasons I didn't really like The Sun Also Rises, although after our week of Hemingway, maybe I'll revisit Sun Also Rises, is because I found that there was a lack of philosophy in it. I actually didn't feel there was a lot of I don't feel there's a lot of Hemingway's philosophy in his books. Unlike, so I actually don't think this is Hemingway's opinion necessarily.
But it's funny, but maybe Sun Also Rises is an exception.
He doesn't do that. For me, he doesn't do that. No, I don't think it's an exception. I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No, I don't think Old Man and the Sea nor this book gives.
No, I agree with these books. I think we could argue Sun Also Rises another time, but I think some of his philosophies there. But that's just my opinion.
It feels, and again, it's been many years, but it feels like this is what happened, and then this is what happens, and then this is what happens. Like this book, like all his books. And every once in a while, this is what I wished more from In The Sun Also Rises, but this book, I guess, gave us a little bit more of Hemingway or a little bit more of a philosophy, which is satisfying to me as a reader. I like that. I want that. I want more of it. I want to mention a writer that had to be influenced by Hemingway. And that is Raymond Carver. And because his books are not books, his stories, he only wrote stories, are very lean, like Hemingway. A lot of dialogue, not as much, but some, and characters that are sort of on a kind of mission with a woman or with a not so much war, but it reminded me. Carver reminds me a little bit of Hemingway, if anybody, but I can't think of anybody else.
I can't, Ruben. I think you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, like he's so different than anybody. I was going to ask you a question. If you thought, what do you think is the true American writer? Is it Steinbeck or Hemingway? Like, do you prefer one over the other? I know maybe that's not a fair question to ask you, but I used to always love Hemingway. He was always my number one. But I'm not going to lie to you. Recently, I just kind of fallen more in the Steinbeck camp. Although now that we're reading these pieces again, I go, man, he's maybe I like Hemingway's short stories, and then I like Steinbeck's novels more. I don't know.
For
How do you feel
me,
about
Steinbeck. This is an example though of two very different writers, and
it?
why
Yeah.
I like Steinbeck better is because Steinbeck is a little bit more generous than Hemingway. So that's why I'm saying is like the sun also rises. There's only so much of activity or action. I need to,
Gluttony. Yeah.
and that's Hemingway. Hemingway that's who he was as a person.
Mm-hmm.
He was a man of action. It's hard to dislike him, even after we saw a little bit of it, a lot of him in the documentary that is very unlikable. There's also something about a man who decides to not just write, but to live and to go out and participate in life.
Yeah.
It's great. And so,
I don't think he would have wrote the way he did unless he lived his life the way he did. I don't think he would have wrote like that.
So if you're asking me what I prefer as a reader, I prefer Steinbeck because I sort of err on that side of somebody who wants to give me wants to lend me or give me his viewpoint, his worldview sometimes to sort of I like writers who even just digress for 2 or 3 pages and talk about the world and how to live. And there's writers like that, and we've already talked about a couple of them. Like Somerset Maugham is a classic example of somebody who will digress for 2 or 3 pages.
Yeah.
And I just like that more in writers. But Hemingway's great. Farewell to Arms is a great one. And what were you going to say?
Now, one last thing, because it's when you read a book, some things just stay with you. And one of the things that stayed with me, and we alluded to it a little bit in the film, is the Caporetto battle and then the retreat. What not upset me, but what stayed with me was that there was this major retreat at the front lines, and they were the Germans were pushing them back, the Italians, and they were full mode retreat, and they started killing the Italian leadership. Decided to execute anybody who was in leadership, like a colonel, lieutenant, whoever was retreating. So they would stop leaders and they would ask them some questions, and they would end up shooting them. You didn't see that in the movie, because in the movie it was more of like an AWOL situation, but actually in the book it was more of a retreat. And the Italians actually censored this book and didn't let it be printed for a while. But I'm sharing that because I'm thinking about today's days, Ruben, that today sometimes I feel like I'm in a twilight zone. Some things that happen regarding politics, regarding the whole mandates and what have you, and it was just unsettling. And I thought, man, even back then people thought the world was just blowing up, and today I think we feel the same way. And I think Hemingway did a good job just picturing that world, with disarray, distractions, uncertainty, and I think that's why another reason why I just love this book. So there you have it.
Yes, we both recommend A Farewell to Arms. Thank you for joining us during Hemingway Week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.